And it says we are live once again.
Oh, good.
Jolly good.
Alive and very yellow today.
We are. Spring has sprung.
Oh, that's right. Yes, spring has just begun.
Indeed. So happy 24th of March, 2026. Hope everybody's recovered from St. Paddy's Day. And you're all alive and kicking out there. And like I always say, if you've got your corkscrews handy or your kettles on, either one works for us. So today on Teaflix, I'm really excited to introduce you to what I feel like is a new friend. He came to me by way of the lovely Jenny Bowie McCoy and the Visit Houston people down in Houston. And he went to interview and taste one of our chefs, the lovely David Skinner, the Choctaw chef who has Ishtia and Eculent. And David said, oh my gosh, you're going to so enjoy Boris. You guys have so much in common with the Russia background. You got to get to know each other. And once we had chatted, I said, well, I think the audience will really enjoy him. So Boris was born in 1979. He's a Russian-born American novelist, memoirist, and food writer, known for exploring themes of immigration, family, identity, and culture, often through the lens of food and memories. He was born in Minsk, which was then part of the Soviet Union and is now Belarus, into a Jewish family. In 1988, at about age 9, he immigrated to the United States with his parents, an experience that later became central to much of his writing and philosophy. He was raised in the US and went on to study Russian literature at Princeton University, no less. Oh, name dropper.
Yep.
And later earning an MFA in creative writing from New York University. He first gained recognition as a novelist with A Replacement Life in 2014, a New York Times notable book that won major literary awards. Don't Let My Baby Do Rodeo in 2016, also a New York Times notable book. And The Unwanted, 2025, a later novel about displacement and conflict. It says 2025, but I may be wrong on that one. He'll correct me. Boris's fiction often centers on immigrant life, moral dilemmas, and generational tensions, especially within post-Soviet Jewish families. Fishman's also widely known as a food writer, which is how we met, particularly for his memoir. This is a must for people who are food obsessed, history obsessed, and want to know all about culture. Savage Feast, which came out in 2019. The book blends family history with recipes tracing 3 generations across Eastern Europe and the US. It uses food as a way to explore identity, trauma, and cultural continuity. It's a fabulous read. Beyond books, he's contributed essays, criticism, and food writing to major publications such as The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, Food and Wine, and Travel and Leisure, or Leisure if you're American. Boris has taught creative writing at institutions including Princeton University and the University of Montana, and he is currently a professor of literature and creative writing at the University of Austin, Texas. So welcome, Mr. Boris Fishman.
Hello. Good morning.
Hello to you both. What a lovely introduction. My first question is for you. Who wrote that introduction?
Well, we both researched you from your website, from the Austin, Texas website, from your Amazon profile, from your publisher, and things that New York Times had said, and all over the place. So
I think that's the most articulate and insightful representation I've ever had.
I will email it to you. Feel free to use it.
We're available for hire.
It was beautifully said and revealed me to myself. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you so exhausted you're going to need a little lie down now? You didn't know you'd done all that, did you?
We'll work for vodka.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So let's get going with the, back to the future, back to the egg. Ange had a question because when I was a singer, she came up with me on a couple of tours to Siberia and Moscow and various places. So she's very, very well aware of the scenery.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So what are some of your most vivid memories of your childhood in Soviet Russia? And how did those early experiences shape your worldview as it is now?
So, I have a funny fact to share in that regard. I left the Soviet Union when I was a boy, and it was a liberation in all the ways you'd think to come to the United States. We were so grateful to be accepted, to be taken in, to be given opportunity here, to find here all the things you would assume. And so for the longest time, when somebody asked me the question you just asked me, my answer was some version of Soviet Union bad, America good. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to complicate that story a little bit. The truth is that even as officially the Soviet Union was a terrible place to live, my family sheltered me so comprehensively that I knew none of it. And I was just a boy with adults who loved him and doted on him and who sort of gave him a chance to speak when he wanted to, which, by the way, I think has a lot to do with why I'm a writer. They gave me that confidence to express myself. And the experiences I had were just kind of sheltered and sweet. I had my friends. I had I don't know if I should call her a girlfriend, but a dear female friend who tied the laces on my cap because I didn't know how to do it. And we played ice hockey outside because, it was frozen over half the year. Yeah. We had these gorgeous horse chestnut trees. So I have a very acute memory of, those spiky shells, green shells that they come in. I can still feel those spikes on my fingertips,
Yeah, conkers.
Yeah, these are nice memories. And so in recent years, I've just had to kind of accept that actually that was a very sweet, sheltered time that was actually quite viciously interrupted by the immigration to America, right? Because in the Soviet Union, my parents were proper parents. They took care of me. But once we came to America, I learned English fastest.
Yes.
And I became the parent.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that about, did you speak Russian or English at home?
We speak Russian at home to this day. I still speak Russian to my parents to this day. It's our primary language. Yeah. But in those early years, there were so many things about this culture that just didn't exist in the Soviet Union. I like to compare it like if you were to imagine immigrating to North Korea right now, that's how different it was. Yes. And so there are just all these things that we never had to deal with. And suddenly figuring them out became my responsibility. And it was an experience of it was a very intense, stressful experience that I think has never really left me. So for me, there was a real rupture around that time.
You were 11, right?
9.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah. That's even more upsetting. That's so funny that you would learn English first, obviously. Duck to water, right? Being out and around with other kids and in school, and then the parents presumably isolated within the community or the synagogue or the groups that they were with. Funnily enough, side story, when I was doing my singing and dancing in Russia, I had to go and just learn your basic, привет, как дела, хорошо, all of the conversational things that tourists learn. And that's all I thought I picked up. Fast forward, to about 6 or 7 years ago, broke my ankle, had to have surgery, went in, day surgery, pins, plates, all of that stuff, and came out in the recovery room, and the nurse was Russian, and we were evidently chatting, and thank you very much. And I woke up, and these two brought me home. A few weeks later, I had to go back for a checkup, and the same nurse was there, and she greeted me in Russian. I said, I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian. She said, yes, you do. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, we had a 45-minute conversation in fluent Russian in the recovery room. It's in your brain. It just doesn't want to come out your mouth. Because I spent so much time there that it must, through osmosis. I'll dream in Russian sometimes or German, but can't speak Russian when I'm
sober.
Sober, yeah. Isn't that crazy?
What a powerful weapon the brain is. I feel like we know so little about what it's capable of.
Yes.
No kidding. So that whole them being in charge of you and now you being in charge of communications, it must have changed the trajectory of not just your childhood, but your adolescence and thus your life, right?
I mean, in a nutshell, it ended my childhood. My childhood ended at 9, or let's say 10 or so, once sort of the terms of this contract became clear. So I'm the parent of a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and, I'm not planning to immigrate with them. I mean, I would actually, but for family reasons, I can't. Right. And it's just very important for me to preserve sort of the carefree nature of their childhood as long as I can, right? Not beyond the teenage years. At that point, it's time to sort of begin to come into your responsibilities. But I very much don't want to ask them to carry my water in any way. I have only the greatest sympathy for what my parents were going through, right? They took an incredibly heroic, courageous, sacrificing step in their lives. But that was hard for me, and I want to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen to my kids.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, everything upward, not just language.
Well, now, what sort of challenges did you face adjusting to life in America as such a young immigrant?
What slapped you between the eyes first of boy, this is
Well,
different.
you can turn the past tense in that question into present tense, because you could say, what challenges do you still struggle with in adjusting to America nearly 40 years later? There are certain things about this country, as grateful as I am for what it's given me, that I will never become accustomed to, right? I grew up in a country where friendships worked completely differently, right?
Yeah.
Relationships worked, people were perhaps more suspicious of each other, but also quicker to intimacy and disclosure and confession, right? Like when Russians form bonds, they form them quickly and they form them intensely. And I've always been taken aback by how long it takes to become candid with somebody in American culture. We also have to talk about just the dominion of money and profit in American life. It just did not exist in the same terms in the Soviet Union. And I will never become accustomed to just how much is determined and justified by money in this culture, right?
It's very, very transactional.
Very transactional. I could be wrong, but this may be just nostalgia and romance. But if I'm not mistaken, we did not have advertising in the Soviet Union.
No.
And I'm here to tell you that life was so much better for it.
Yes. I think it probably came in after the wall fell, because I was part of one of the first reclama, they would call it, right? On Radio, one channel, 11 time zones, one TV channel, which is, I think, something people don't understand, right? There was the government voice, and that was the programming you got, and that was it. And the first few times I went, I think you're right. There was no word reclama, and there were no ad breaks.
So you just have to, like, when I think of life in the Soviet Union, the word I come up with is muffled. And what I mean by muffled is there's no noise. And sometimes you want a little noise. Sometimes, right, there was relatively little to do, relatively little for entertainment, very few options, right? You're talking about the TV channel. That's a great example.
Right.
But considering how much noise we have in our lives currently, right?
Yeah.
This and, everything like it, right? I sometimes wonder about, I think back to how wonderfully muffled in like a winter-like way that life must have been by comparison,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, the muffling was probably propaganda, especially when your parents were growing up. But I understand with the doom scrolling. I mean, the amount of times that in a supermarket parking lot, somebody with earbuds in, staring at their phone, will walk right in front of them or behind my moving car. And then, I beep I stop, of course. And then they look at me like, what the hell? Like it's my fault. It's crazy.
And we're blindly slow walking into this new reality. And many of us don't mind it. I acknowledge that. I do mind it. And it strikes me as a kind of illness, as a kind of epidemic. And I'm engaged in my own losing battle to keep these things at bay, to keep them out of my kids' hands. But directionally, it's so troubling to me. And I think more and more, again, please don't mistake this for a wish to return to that time, right? That country was broken in a million ways. But at the same time, some elements of it were a liberation from what the free market foists upon you if left unchecked, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it still felt like, to me, when we would go, remember in Siberia, our driver said, oh, my wife wants to make, brunch or breakfast for you, whatever. And they would go to the whole block of flats, and somebody would have one little piece of salmon. Somebody would have one hard-boiled egg. Somebody had, a couple shots of vodka.
Somebody had a bar of Twinkies.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Somebody had saved Twinkies, which, never go rotten, right? And it was Christmas time, in fact. Yeah. And they laid on this whole Christmas dinner lunch thing for us, and the whole block of flats pulled together, and somebody put one beautiful little dish of, red cabbage or a pickle or something. And it looked and felt like a banquet. It was like the babushka of the building had put her arms around this whole gathering, and they made absolute beauty out of absolutely nothing.
I had you're making me think in 2000. So this was already a decade after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. I was an intern at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow.
Wow.
And I remember being at the home of an artist, and she prepared stewed vegetables with sour cream. That is what she had.
Yummy.
kind of pan-fried vegetables with a little sour cream mixed in for flavor and complexity, I guess. But like, she didn't have meat, right? And just that's that. But that was the maximum of what she had, because she was offering it to a guest. It was the nicest meal she could put together. It was humbling. It was humbling.
Yeah. I mean, it's true what they say. It sounds like such a cliche, but in places like that, you can taste the love. Love is an ingredient. Love and respect. It totally is, right?
And I don't know how it is for you, but the best meals I create are when I don't have enough of any one thing, right? And
yeah, I'm Mrs. Air Fry, Mrs. Crockpot. I just like, oh, I've got 3 carrots, a couple of red skin potatoes, a Yukon Gold, a stick of old celery, and some chicken broth, and I'll figure it out, right?
Right. It's forced innovation. You're forced to put together things you wouldn't habitually, because when you have plenty, you can sort of construct it the way that you're quote unquote supposed to, but then you're just making the same thing over and over.
Right. Yeah. And or eating, junk food, as America is wont to do.
Tell me now, are there any specific dishes from your childhood that sort of carry an emotional or symbolic significance for you?
Yes. So my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was an incredible cook, and she's kind of like the I don't know if I'd call her the star, but she is the emotional center of Savage Feast, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that she was a Holocaust survivor, and she had a very troubled relationship to food for the rest of her life.
Yes.
So she always made too much, and she always made us eat too much of it. And, this turns into a sweet little joke about Jewish grandmothers. But the fact is, you said very astutely that this food memoir, right, is actually about hunger. It's about trauma.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so much of our relationship to food was conditioned by her terror of not having enough. We always had 5 loaves of bread at home at any one given time. 5 loaves of bread.
Doomsday prepper grandma, right?
Totally. And there's some people who, those like for example, she and her sister went through very similar experiences during the war. It turned them into very different people. Her sister became, right. Her sister her sister would use up every little crumb of everything she had. Whereas my grandmother loved buying 5 loaves and then tossing 4 of them out, because that's how much there was. That's right. She was constantly reassuring herself that, like, that's the kind of, anyway, long story short, she made these, I guess they're a kind of potato pancake, right? It's a basic potato pancake. In Belarusian, they're called diruny.
Huh.
No, I'm sorry. Draniki. Diruny has meat inside. Draniki is just potato and onion and flour.
Okay.
And nothing could be simpler. Nothing. Like, literally, you can't make a simpler meal. But we had this incredible heavy pot. It was called a duck pot because it was the size you could roast a duck. Yeah. And that's what she stewed these potato pancakes with onions, and like it just slowly braised and gained flavor. And there are certain dishes where it really doesn't matter what your hunger level is. If it is placed in front of you, it will be gone. You will keep eating it until it's gone. And that was one of them. And my mom actually makes, an excellent facsimile, but like, the top prize will always belong to my grandmother.
Yeah. Well, we would call them latkes, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
And what would you serve them with? Would you serve them with like pureed beets or applesauce or?
We didn't we didn't do applesauce in the Soviet Union. We did sour cream.
Sour cream. Yeah.
But just like, certain chefs will build their entire careers around the seemingly simple dish of pizza, which is actually incredibly difficult to keep all those elemental ingredients in perfect balance. Same thing was here: flour, salt, potatoes, onions. That's it. And yet, she like that it's not quite a trinity; it's a quadrinity or something. But like, it all hovered in perfect harmony with each other.
Yeah, in Liverpool, we'd call a duck pot the one they throw at you when you've pissed off the cook because you duck.
I'll always think of that when I think of her duck pot. Yeah, I wish I wish you could see that, like, the Soviet Union did make some things very well. This thing, like a Le Creuset is a feather next to one of these things. Like
Right.
it was pounded heavy steel. It was so heavy. And we actually managed to take it out of the Soviet Union with us, and it traveled with us for a very long time.
Wow, that's amazing. You pay excess baggage on it. Good grief.
But really think about it. We were allowed to take so little with us, right? We had
Yes.
strict weight requirements. And to think so much of a piece of cooking equipment that you would devote God knows how many pounds or kilos to ferrying that with you, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's like a good old, Arkansas cast iron pan. Once it's seasoned and it's had the cornbreads and the whatever else and the ribs and everything in it, it imparts flavor just as much as some of the ingredients. It's another ingredient,
family, isn't it?
right?
Yeah.
It's another ingredient.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the container is part of the story, right? The cooking implement is part of the story. If you cook the wrong thing, it won't be the same. Sorry.
I'm just looking at page 176 of your fabulous book. And when Angie asked you what was your favorite dish, I was guessing or hoping it wasn't going to be Oksana's liver pie. It sounds very interesting. I do like chicken livers in pate format, but boy, liver pie.
Well, this is pate format. You have to just imagine these airy light crepes, right? A stack of airy, and in between each one, there is a kind of liver pate, a schmear of liver pate with, speaking of holy trinities, garlic, onion, and dill. Yeah, garlic, onion, and dill.
I might actually try and make that because I do like liver pate, but just the thought of a lump of liver. We used to do that in Liverpool. Sunday night supper was liver and onions, and it was just a big piece of liver and boiled potatoes and parsley. And my dad loved it. He used to eat boiled onions, didn't he?
Oh yeah, for supper
with cloves in them, and we'd boil an onion in milk with cloves, and that would be his supper. Just the simplest things,
Boiled onions, what you said, with milk.
Yes.
Yeah, and cloves just stuck in it. Yeah.
How great!
You would take it out and cut it in quarters so that the milk would get in.
Now I'm going to be starving by the end of this program.
And all you're getting is beans on toast.
I make chicken livers to this day. When my wife was pregnant with our second child, she needed iron, and sort of chicken liver entered the rotation on a fairly regular basis. I had to get creative with it, and it's been a part of our rotation ever since. That's
a great thing to also have your kids, see their great grandma. If it was your grandma, their great grandma's cooking. I think it's really a grounding thing for a family who, cooks at home and eats at home. There's just really meaning on stories on the plate, isn't there? I mean, you've received recognition for your writing.
Yes. What awards or achievements have meant the most to you personally, and why?
Well, that's a great question. So obviously I'm very great. I write, I don't know how to describe them without being implicitly pejorative about other kinds of books, but I write serious books that I think that they're morally uneasy books, and they're not easy reads either emotionally or practically. And I've often heard from people that I'm really grateful I read this, but it was a hard experience, things like that. Right. And so the first thing that I'm just really grateful that a prominent American publisher has chosen to support me through all these books. I'm talking about HarperCollins. They've been with me since the beginning, or I've been with them since the beginning. And the fact that these people have continued to invest in me, even though I'm not apparently an easy sell, is like an incredible affirmation.
Yes,
and then,
yes.
And then the second thing is, once in a while, you will get one of these emails, and it's just a reader sharing their personal experience. And it doesn't have to be entirely positive, but like sometimes people will be so deeply touched, they will have their lives slightly altered by the experience of reading your book, and they will write to tell you so.
Yes.
I mean, you're floating on air for the rest of the week, because what is more personal? What is more personal than writing a book? There is no more personal expression of oneself. Right. Maybe a meal, maybe cooking a meal. Maybe that's why I do both those things. So for somebody to respond in an equally personal way, is just like, I would take that. I would take that over sales.
Interesting. So take me back to A Replacement Life. What for the listeners who don't know, what was the genesis and the general idea behind that book, and where on earth did you start?
So A Replacement Life is about, in a sentence, it's about a young failing writer with my background, who is kind of just, more than anything, he wants to succeed in American journalism, right? Which is, of course, what he was brought to America to do by his family, to succeed.
Right.
He just whatever his instincts and interests are, they're not the right match for the sort of fancy magazine, Blue Blood magazine, where he works. And so he's approached by his grandfather with an illegal scheme, a morally just but lawfully illegal scheme, which is to invent stories of Holocaust suffering for old Russian Jews in Brooklyn who definitely suffered during the war, but they did not suffer in the right way to qualify legally for the reparations that Germany was offering at the time. And their sort of self-justification is like, why do the Germans get to decide what suffering is, right? Why, if you were incarcerated in the Minsk ghetto for, 9 months, you're not entitled to reparations. But if you're incarcerated for 12 months, you are entitled. Like, why did they, after trying to exterminate us, why do they get to decide where the dividing line, right? And he tries to respond by saying, well, because the line has to be drawn somewhere, right? And initially he resists because he's scandalized. Like, why would you want to drag me back to that way of living, right? That you brought me here to flee. You brought me here to live honestly, to succeed by my talents. But the fact is that he's got a healthy ego of his own. He wants an arena. He wants an audience. And little by little, he succumbs to his grandfather's seductions. And he starts writing these false narratives, right? And what he uses to create them is the story of his grandmother, who died recently.
Right.
And she died before he could extract her stories because he was so busy focused on his career. And so he imagines what her life might have been like, what her wartime experiences might have been like, as a kind of like misplaced homage to her. And he kind of reinvents that wartime history and then uses those details and facts to invent these stories for these old men. And he's good at it. They're getting their and then of course all these things begin to come to a head, and certain questions have to be answered. I set up a bunch of stuff that then so that's kind of the premise of the book.
I mean, you can see the character of the grandfather's point of view. You don't quite check enough boxes, but what if you did? Right? What if you just check a few more? They did this to me, and it was over this period of time.
And what I was fascinated by as an author is there is no documentation. It's not like you can supply, some kind of voucher that confirms you were in such and such ghetto or concentration camp. It comes down to, can you tell a good story? Can you tell a persuasive story? And for me, that question was exciting.
That's interesting. And then, of course, Don't Let My Baby Do Rodeo was also a New York Times notable book, but kind of a switch.
Yeah, I have switched with every book to the detriment of my career and my audience, but it has, like, for example, the newest book, which perhaps we'll talk about, which is this one, The Unwanted,
right,
which came out last year. You were correct about the date.
25,
I had a dear friend read it, and she stopped midway, and I said, why did you stop midway? And she said, she's Iranian, so she calls me Boris June, which is like dear Boris in Farsi. She's like, Boris June, you're supposed to be funny. This one's not funny. And I said to her, I really dislike the idea of supposed to, the only supposed to is I'm supposed to follow the story. And if the story is not funny, it's not, this one is about migrants fleeing a civil war in an unnamed country. It's not that funny,
There's no, and now back to our regular programming with 15 minutes of stand-up comedy. Right.
Yeah. And so with Rodeo, I wanted, so obviously A Replacement Life, except for like the big fraud at its heart, was very autobiographical. I wanted to do something completely not autobiographical. And so that novel is written from the perspective of a woman, a parent, which I was not a parent yet at the time. And it's really just a story about a person who married the wrong man and became and got drawn into a very loving but very suffocating family that also is not the right place for her. How that person slowly uses the kind of liberation message of American culture to free herself.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I did a book report on it, and it's on the way. I ordered it from Amazon. I did a book report on it, and I thought, what an interesting thing for a young boy from the former Soviet Union to write a book from a feminist perspective. I thought that was great.
That's exactly what I was after. There's kind of a lot of talk, not very intelligent talk, about who we are and are not allowed to write as or write, and I just think it's incredibly difficult to write from the perspective, whether you're allowed to or not. Setting that question aside, it is incredibly difficult to inhabit the perspective of a person who's really not like you. And I wanted that challenge. I feel like it's a tribute to the craft of writing. It's what all writers should be doing all the time.
Yeah, somebody further up the chat just said, sounds like you definitely think outside the box. And certainly with Don't Let My Baby Do Rodeo, that is 100%. I mean, you could have put a female author, nom de plume on it, and I wouldn't have, from what I've read so far, I wouldn't have guessed that it was written by a man.
Well, so that to me is like the greatest compliment I could hope for. The greatest, absolutely.
Yeah, no, because we do see the world through different plumbing and different perspectives. That's for damn sure. So let's talk about The Unwanted. Let's focus in on that, because that's your latest and greatest, well, not maybe greatest, but your latest story. How did that come about?
So I do think of it as my greatest.
Okay.
It's maybe the bleakest, but it's sort of the triumph of what my skills as a writer are so far.
Boris June, it's not funny.
Touche. Too true. But I feel like in writing about, first of all, it takes place in an unnamed country.
Yeah.
And you don't even know what ethnicity these people are. And that's on purpose, because so many things come into our mind when I say Syrian, or I say Afghan, or I say Palestinian, or I say Israeli, or I say Russian, right? We just
predisposed to the dogma of it all. Yeah.
And if you take yourself out of that, right, a lot of these conflicts, they have they have common threads. And one of the commonest threads is the fact of the majority not protecting the minority.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right. And I'm sensitized to that because I was a minority in the Soviet Union that was not only not protected by the majority, but vilified and demonized by it.
Right.
And so I take a very close spotlight on just one family, 3 members of that minority without a name, and what they have to do to survive in a civil war where rebels who are purporting to represent their cause, right, are engaged in a civil war with the government, and the government selectively punishes and abuses members of the minority sect, right, as supposed allies and sympathizers with these rebels. And as in so many of these situations, this family, it's a go-along family. They're not moral heroes. They're ordinary people. They've managed to go along. They keep quiet. They say what they have to say. They salute when they have to salute. And their main priority is just keeping safe. But at the beginning of the book, they have reached a point where it's no longer possible to stay out of view, and they have to flee. And so it's just about their flight from civil war in this unnamed country, and the moral compromises they have to engage in order to survive, right? I think sometimes as people who live in comfortable, wealthy countries, we judge people who come from harsher environments as if they had perfect options in perfect situations, the way we so often do. Yeah. And they don't. They have to make decisions in impossible situations, right, and in order to protect their families in circumstances that would unravel so many of us. And that's what I wanted to draw attention to.
Well, and I think by not naming the country, you can, it would be interesting to go back. Have you gone back either to students or friends and done sort of a straw poll of where do you think this was?
And it's I mean, everybody recognizes that, it's somewhere in the Middle East or Central Asia or let's say east of Lisbon, let's say somewhere in that part of the world.
Somewhere between Berlin and Beijing. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's been so satisfying that so many of them, every single one has said a different place.
Interesting. That's
exactly what I wanted, because it's the same thing in all these places. The people with the power do not protect the people without. And if you're going to thrive as a country, you have to protect the people without the power. You have to protect their interests. Right. That's how a country thrives.
I mean, I think a lot of people who are fortunate enough to be born in America, in this wonderful place where we have the First Amendment and heaven knows why, but the Second Amendment and all of the rest of them. I think that, they don't realize that in some places your wardrobe can literally get you killed. Your sexuality can get you killed. That what you wear and who you love can be a death sentence to this day in 2026. And, boy, when they say travel broadens the mind, they're not kidding.
Yeah.
And you just made me realize something that, like, I've always thought that I'm so sensitized to small surrounding details because, well, I'm a writer and writers pay attention to everything. But actually, maybe I'm so sensitized to surrounding details because in the Soviet Union, you were constantly paying attention to small signals, official and undeclared, about what things meant.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. When I first checked, the very first night I checked into a Moscow hotel, my manager, Nazim Nadirov, who is a gay Kurdish Jewish person who was running a rock and roll company booking agency in Moscow in the mid 80s. God bless him. I mean, I've come from Hollywood. I'd lived in Munich. I grew up in Liverpool around, the whole rock and roll thing. And our first meeting, I met him in Germany where he was free to speak. But our first meeting in Moscow was he took us in the bathroom. He ran the shower, he ran the taps, and he kept flushing the toilet. And he whispered to me in German, and I translated to my English musical director friend, Barry Coffing, who was with me. He's like, okay, so there are cameras here, there are microphones there are blah, 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 blah. And he took us to the telephone in the middle of the bedroom, and he lifted it. It was one of those old round dial telephones that the Gen Alpha doesn't know. They just push it. They don't know how that works. And he picked it up, and it had 3 rubber feet and a microphone. And, because it's in a Western hotel and they want compromat on you, right? They want to see if you're going to cheat with your musical director while you're, both away from your husband and wife or whatever. So, I mean, I can't even imagine. And we're just there as tourists playing music and going on TV and being rock stars, right? But when you grow up with that sort of implicit, you're being watched, you're being listened to, it must just really, it's like Chinese water torture. It must just drip on your psyche.
Yeah, it degrades you psychically. And if you live there for long enough, it never leaves you, even after you get to safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I'll tell you a little story. My first serious girlfriend, her father was a physician who worked in Brooklyn with a heavily Russian community. And I once asked him, aren't you scandalized that these people, came into this country, these people being us, came into this country and they're constantly hitting you up to like participate in insurance fraud with them. Yeah. Right? Aren't you outraged? Yeah. I'm outraged for you. I'm embarrassed on their behalf. And he said, Boris, you got to give it a generation. And he was 1000% correct, right? Their children are some of the greatest patriots that you'll ever meet. I mean, even the parents were, as they were defrauding their adopted homeland. But the point is that in addition to protecting the rights of the minorities, right, the most, I think, successful, powerful, confident states have patience and forgiveness for their least acculturated citizens.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, you can't assimilate overnight. It's back to the cooking analogy. You know, the longer you leave the pastrami in the pot, the better it'll be, right? It doesn't microwave in 3 minutes.
That's right. And I understand that perhaps in Europe, integration has not worked as well as it has in America, but America's newest citizens want to assimilate, which is like the greatest testament you can have to the quality of the country and the culture and the product. They want to become American. You just have to give them time.
Right. And I think also if you look at the traditions, the maps, the language, the culture, the cuisines of Europe, when you land in America, generally speaking, it's English and Spanish coast to coast, north to south, right? You have, you can get God forbid, a burger and fries anywhere across any interstate in the country. You can get fried chicken, you can get, whatever floats your boat. But imagine you've come off a boat from Lampedusa and you get shuffled from Greece to Macedonia, to Italy, to northern Sweden, to then maybe the northeast coast of England. You have to assimilate 4 or 5 different languages and cultures and climates and religions, whatever, in one immigrant story, which may be over a period of 5 years, 3 years. They shuffle these poor people from post to post because governments run out of money, and Germany does a deal with Sweden, and they do a deal with France, and they're just like FedExed across this. It's a very small space, but boy, it has a lot more diversity than this fantastic place called America, where you are guaranteed of certain truths and certain freedoms. But, you try going from, I don't know, Gibraltar to Malmo, completely different thing.
Yeah. And I'll just say that, precisely because I myself have never assimilated fully in America. There is a part of me that continues to live in Europe. It's something that I would love to. It may be too late for me. It may be too late for me to return to Europe, but I would love to try. Never
say never. She's 96. She's writing her 8th book. It's never too late to try anything. So
did you, Dr. Angie, did you say that you wrote your first one at 82?
83, yeah.
80. Yeah, on the cover it says 82. My Long and Winding Road by Angie McCartney, edition 1 at 82.9 years.
So you have published 7 books since that time.
Yeah, and she's 96.
And that is remarkable. And what is the new one about?
We're writing it together, and it's being called Becoming British for Beginners, and it's just a whole bunch of silly cultural things like rolling cheese down hills, and how a bap and a balm and a batch cake are the same thing but 15 miles apart. A loaf of bread has 5 different names, and just the stupidity of Britain, and how it's sort of, it's a stiff upper lip apology, but there will be a test. If you're going to assimilate into Britain, you better watch Monty Python and Graham Norton and read Shakespeare and do all of those things, because they're just in our DNA.
Is there anything about chestnut hacking?
No, but I would love to hear more about that idea.
Do tell.
You mean where you get on strings and you conkers? We used to call it playing conkers. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Conkers.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, I was teaching Portrait of the Artist as a young man to my students this past term. And there's a reference to the hacking chestnut conqueror 40, and I had to look it up. I didn't know what it was, and I was just curious whether it extends past Ireland into England. It was just such an odd and specific.
And what you used to try and do is, if your friends were coming up, first of all, you had to get past the spiny outside and get that off, or your grandma would do that for you with the sharp fish knife. And then you would have the conker. But what we used to do is we used to leave the conkers. If friends were coming over to play and they forgot to bring their chestnut, you'd leave them on the wall in the sun or in the greenhouse or something, because they'd be more brittle, and you'd play with the ones that had the wet interior. You'd soak them in a bit of water before the game, and then you'd play them with the brittle one, and you'd smash it, and theirs would blow to pieces, and you'd win.
It's a huge thing. There's world championships and everything.
Oh yeah. It used to be called cheating in our back garden, with wet ones and dry ones, and the wet ones always won. I don't know why I knew that, but gosh, that takes me. So thanks to you, we'll write a little chapter on on chestnut hacking, aka Conkers, and we'll dedicate it to you.
Please do.
So critics often praise the rhythm of your prose. Do you think that comes from your relationship with English as a second language?
Absolutely. We spend a lot of time on this in class, not only what the sentence is saying, but how it is saying it, the rhythm and the music. And what's interesting is I don't have any musical talent whatsoever. I'm a good dancer, but I don't have any musical talent whatsoever. But I hear prose as music.
Interesting.
And I think that you're spot on. It has everything to do with picking it up at 9 rather than at 0. You're conscious of it, right? You can turn it this way and that and be like, isn't that funny how it does that and this, right? Like, Russian is phonetic. There's no silent sounds. Whereas here, you show up and you get a word like daughter, that your mind comes up with all kinds of metaphor. It's like, so the G and the H in daughter, right? Come to my mind visually as a kind of well, right? Like we're on the ground with da and we're on the ground with ter because you pronounce them, but then like there's this dip in the middle, right? That kind of disappears. These are the things that sort of happen visually and musically sometimes when you're old enough to notice, so to speak. So I think that's exactly, and I delight in, I don't know if anybody notices, but I delight in that part of the writing process. I really do.
Yeah, I think when you grow up with English as your first language, you don't really realize how complicated it is. Everyone says, "Oh, English, it's the easiest language in the world." One of them, granted, but God, all of the different pronunciations are, well, I can't think of examples now, but
like make or gave. Why isn't it make or gave? Like it's I mean, I'm getting to live through this again because my daughter, who's 7, is learning to read. And it's hard for her, and I can see why. It's like, how is a small person supposed to understand that? Speaking of rhythm, right? Like that a word that's spelled RHYTHM is pronounced rhythm, or so.
Well, you got love, dove, and move.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Why doesn't move have 2 O's?
Yeah. And so it's kind of, humbling to realize, and I don't recall having learned it. It just happened one day. But
yeah, I think that's part of the conversational thing. And that's maybe because I'm, I have the music gene from her, and I have a musical ear, and I'm a parrot, and I can copy accents and dialects and all of those things. I think that's probably where I learned the Russian that this nurse told me I can speak, because it was phonetic, it was conversational, it went in my ear, it didn't go in my eyes, because I still see the Russian word restaurant as pektopa. Right?
Well, Ruth is P-Y-T.
And Ruth is P-Y-T. Pete. Ruth.
It's Ruth.
Not pretty young thing. Old part. But
the old part.
That's how I learned English. That is how I learned English. I like the word language, right? You can spell most of it using Cyrillic letters. It becomes a completely different word, lapdiade, but it's how I memorized English words.
Interesting.
Wow.
That's just absolutely crazy. Yeah. So let's talk about your educational career a little bit.
Yeah. So teaching and mentorship, you taught at Princeton and now the University of Austin. What is the biggest misconception aspiring writers have about becoming successful as authors?
That's a great question. Misconception. Well, okay, I got one. I think the biggest misconception they have is that it is an experience of random inspiration as opposed to consistent perspiration.
I like that.
Forget I asked.
I like that. That should be a T-shirt. The Boris Fishman merch store.
You just have to treat it like a job. You got to sit down and do it every day. And when you do that, it becomes like a you break the wild horse and it comes to you, if that makes sense, right? Okay. It won't come to you if you only show up once in a while. Sure.
It's like you can't be Arnold Schwarzenegger without lifting all the weights, right?
Yeah, you got to lift those weights every day, whether you feel like it or not. And beautiful things happen when you make it a regular monastic practice. That's how novels are born. And it's 2 years, but in 2 years you will have a draft.
That's incredible. So let's talk about your food and wine, especially wine writing, and how we met through Visit Houston and Jenny and Chef David Skinner. How on earth do you find the time? And obviously the food part comes from, your history and your nostalgia with your family and all of that stuff. But how on earth did you get into, how does one just suddenly write for travel and leisure or food and wine?
So I'm so proud of this because, about 7 years ago, we started having children, and so much just closes down when you start having children. It's all you can do to do the main thing. And
That's funny. And don't forget, Boris, they're only cute to save their damn lives.
That is, even their voices, everything is engineered to help you not throttle them all the time.
I know, and it doesn't get any better. Take it from me.
After 66 years.
And I think that I reached for wine. I reached for wine right at that time, right when the first child was born. And I think that's because yes. What are you drinking, by the way?
Just a little California rosé from Monterey County.
Lovely.
A little Tuesday morning.
I think for me, wine is a connection to Europe. The Europe that I left behind. It's a connection to a time when things moved more slowly, because wine takes the time it needs, whether your life is instantaneous or not. Yep. And I think for me, it was a lifeline. And I began, as you'll hear from anybody who's fallen in love with wine, it's hard to explain why, but once it gets a hold of you, you become obsessed. It's a time machine, right? You put your nose in a glass of wine, and you could be back in your grandmother's kitchen as a 6-year-old boy for a second, just for a second, but you can. And so for me, I think that was really liberating. And guess what? Like I'm not going to be a winemaker. No. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to go into retail. That is not where my experience is. My experience is with words. Yes. And so that has been the most organic way of accessing this fascination. And, little by little, and also like as a person who immigrated from another country and culture, I can't sit still. I'm going somewhere all the time. I'm going to Europe twice in June.
Well, yeah, we've been there, done that from the West Coast.
Yeah, it's a lot. But like for me, travel is a celebration. And I think the one thing that I really try hard to do in my travel pieces is bring in that literary dimension from my fiction and memoir writing. Right. You read some travel writing these days, and it's like such and such place was incredible, and like
it could be written by Chat. It could be written by Chat GPT. There's
travel writing can be an art form. It can be an art form.
Right.
If I may I just published a piece in Travel and Leisure or Leisure about sort of taking my daughter to Finland to learn how to skate on wild ice.
Wow.
And the reason I wanted to do it in Finland is because as a boy in the Soviet Union, I never learned to skate, played tons of hockey, always in my boots. And it was literally 40 years later. She was the age I was when I was trying to do this in the Soviet Union. Can't go to Russia because they've gone insane. So let's go to Finland, which is next door.
Sure.
And my editor sort of allowed me to get quite poetic with it. And it's one of the best things I've ever published. You can find it online on the Travel and Leisure website.
I will. And what I've loved about researching for this show today, all weekend, I was, reading a lot of your travel pieces. You managed to bring the reader into sort of the fabric of the place. And I can almost smell where you are. And it's a personal experience. A lot of things I see, and, I burned up all my airline mileage getting, of course, food and wine and travel and leisure. But a lot of them nowadays, they just feel like they're spit out by ChatGPT. And so I really hope you keep visiting and stay curious and keep going to places. Like, I know you were probably very tired on a Sunday night, which was, in Kemah, Texas, which is a little bit outside of Houston. Let's be honest. It's 20-minute drive. But you were curious enough to say, what on earth is a Choctaw chef?
Oh, that was one of the absolute highlights of the visit. That was just an absolutely incredible experience. I mean, everything about it. I mean, he's a genius in 10 different ways, but even before I knew that, everything about that was intriguing to me. The fact that it was in Kemah was part of it. The fact that sort of there was indigenous molecular gastronomy in Kemah, Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, I gravitate to those things because, we've all been to the fine dining. We've all been to the tweezered pretentious luxury, right? Like, I think everybody hungers for something real, and that felt real,
Yeah. For those of you listening, we're talking about Chef David Skinner. He has Eculent, ECULENT.com, which was his original, which he's now turned into sort of sips and drinks and a weird Willy Wonka kind of speakeasy thing. But what we're referring to is Ishtia, which is his Choctaw tasting menu. Chef's table. I think it only seats like 16 or 18 people, and they're only open 3 nights a week. But he opened specially for you that night.
Yeah, he opened.
He did. Yeah. Yeah, and I was saying he opened for you because he's not open Sundays.
And just I spent almost 5 hours having the most incredible experience at this restaurant, the most incredible food. And then it was time for me to go back to Houston, and I got into an Uber, and my Uber driver had just purchased a ginormous styrofoam of just incredible fried seafood for her drive from Kemah back to Houston. And it was just like the perfect coda to this exquisite experience, right? Like just the high and the low together was perfect.
That's absolutely great. So after a long day, either teaching in Austin or, feeding the beast, writing, what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite wine, a glass in the evening that you love?
Morning, afternoon, evening, weekend, holiday. For me, there is only Riesling.
Riesling, really? Good grief. Okay. It's something I would eat. I lived in Munich for 3 years. It's something I would eat with German food, but it's not anything I would ever think of buying. However, this coming Thursday, in 2 days, the 26th, there is another one of our Houston clients, Musafir, which is an Indian restaurant in the Galleria that has a Michelin star. They are doing a Southern Smoke Foundation charity wine dinner with Alexana and Rivana, and they are revealing their new Riesling. So I will get onto Humberto de Salcedo, the Somme at Musafir, and find out once that's released how we can get you a bottle.
Oh, I would love that. For me, it is the height of elegance and delicacy and just aroma and express. It's just a well-made Riesling for me. I only need one wine on my desert island.
Oh, that's very interesting. Do you like any of the Austrian, like a Grüne Veltliner or?
Of course. I think also incredibly versatile, age-worthy, sort of better known as a simple quaffing wine, but it's far from that in so many instances. Yeah. I love, like, for example, Ferment in Hungary, right? Incredibly age-worthy. They're these scene stealers that you don't know that much about, right? But if you take the time to sort of range outside the usual grapes and the usual appellations, like there's incredible stuff going on in the world.
Yeah, we have a winemaker friend in, I don't know if you ever get up to the Central Coast here, Paso Robles. Adam Lazar, he is the winemaker for various labels, but he also has a Lazar winery, and he makes a Viognier that's outstanding.
Love Viognier.
I love Viogniers too, and but for me, he's the Pinot Noir master of all masters. He's incredible because, again, wine, microclimates, you get with Paso, you get the fog in the mornings from the sea fret, and then the sun comes out in the afternoon. So
may I just interrupt and say he plays his guitar to the grapes at night.
He does. Before during October, during harvest season, he actually takes a sleeping bag out into the vineyards with his guitar, and he serenades the vines and apologizes for murdering them in the morning.
I did a piece for the New Yorker about a kind of a Ukrainian sparkling wine, winery that was actually inaugurated by Stalin, and they piped in classical music 24 hours a day. They piped it in for the wines as they aged.
So speaking of Stalin, when I was in Armenia doing charity concerts in 1989 after the Leninikan and Spitak earthquakes that killed 40,000 people, we went down there to, unbeknownst to the Russian promoters, we gave all the money away live on TV after 12 shows back to back in a 23,000 seater football arena or basketball arena.
Wow.
But we got to go to the Nairi cognac distillery in, I guess it was just outside of Yerevan, and they actually tapped for us a taste of the Nairi, of the Divin, that there's a picture hanging on the wall next to the casket, and it's Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt. Must have been freezing. They're all sitting there with blankets on, and they're drinking a glass of this cognac that I have just been served, the Yalta conference, that I've just been served out of the same barrel. It was just mind blowing. And the way they have the way they transport the cognac across, the factory or the bottling plant, it's in glass. I mean, glass tubes.
Really?
Yeah. So you can see it. So as soon as the sugar starts to coagulate, they shut it off, and they're all in these little sections like plumbing. Take it out and they clean the sugar crystals off, and then they start the cognac flow again once it's clean. It's unbelievable.
That's so cool. I want to go to Armenia so badly.
Yeah, Armenia it's like Southern California. It's absolutely beautiful. We went, oh my God, we went all over. We were lowered in baskets down into a church that was built into the mountain when religion was, illegal. And we all stood around and sang with the locals and my musicians that I was with, and Nazim Nadarov, my gay Jewish Kurdish manager. We all just stood around and sang Ave Maria, and it was just, it was one of those, after that you wanted to go back to the cognac factory for another visit. Well, this has been absolutely fabulous. Scrolling across the bottom, everybody go to borisfishman.com. This is one incredible, lovely, talented man with a palate and a passion for educating people and writing and traveling, and just one of our curious brethren. That it's just been honestly our honor to spend time with you today. What you don't know, Boris, however, is that one of Angie's 7 books is called Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus. And so she put pen to paper and just put a little limerick together in your honor. Are you sitting comfortably?
Yes, I'm ready.
Jolly good. Okay. Well, after some wine, we'll try not to screw this up, and if we do, we'll just do it twice.
That's right. Okay.
All right. You count it in, Madame.
1, 2, 3. He was born in the USSR. Then in childhood he traveled afar. He discovered his might in his vision to write, and those talents have carried him far. Ta-da! We got it right.
Nobody has ever written me a limerick before. So,
well, now you see, there's a first time for everything, and it's never too late.
I'm really, really touched. This was so nice. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your interest.
Great pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
and
Boris.
Check Boris and all of his fabulosity out at borisfishman.com, and we will see you next week, same time. Keep your corkscrews handy and get your kettles on. We will be joined by Chef Javier Becerra of Cholo Bar in Montrose and Houston. Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.